Okay, only 10 more presents to wrap. You're almost at the finish line. But first... There, the last one. Enjoy a Coca-Cola for a pause that refreshes.
The Lincoln Wishlist sales event is happening now. Here's what's on everyone's wish list. Enjoying holiday jingles with brilliant 3D audio that surrounds you? Check. Watching snow flurries through the panoramic vista roof? Check. Packing up presents with the spacious Lincoln Splitgate? Check. Everything you want. All standard on the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV. Visit your local Lincoln retailer or learn more at Lincoln.com for exceptional offers on 2025 Lincoln vehicles today.
Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today we are talking about Regency Era Sex Education. This is a re-release of a podcast that we did midway through 2025. And at that point, it was in the context of our Revolution season, where, because, there's a lot of overlap between sex education and Revolutionary era as well as in the Regency era, but really we're talking about the Regency era, so I wanted to re-christen this episode so that it becomes part of the Regency era, because I know there's new listeners, and also just to relate to some of the episodes we've done so far. Like, we talk about the ladies of Llangollen in this, we talk about Anne Lister in this, and my guest is the fabulous Alexandra Vasti. So she is a Regency romance novelist, and at the time that we first recorded this in mid-2025, her book, Ladies in Hating, was just about to come out. It is now available. Get yourself a copy of this book, because we've been talking about Vulgar History, Regency Era is a really sapphic-coded season, as it seems to be turning out. And so I think this book about two lady writers in love, a pair of Gothic novelists trade rivalry for love in the swoony, steamy, sapphic Regency by USA Today bestselling author Alexandra Vasti, now available. As well as all of her other books are available. You can learn about all of her books, including she has a new one coming out in June at alexandravasti.com. Anyway, I wanted to replay this episode partially just to have it be part of the Regency season, but also just because I think, it's the holiday, towards the end of the holiday season, it's New Year's Eve, and this is just a romp. It's just a nice time. It's the most fun I've had. It's the most fun I've had talking about sexual practices of the past on this podcast. But honestly, I had so much fun with Alexandra Vasti. She is going to be appearing again later in the Regency season in 2026. So honestly, just enjoy. Just have a nice time. This is a fun one. And Happy New Year. And thank you, everyone, for supporting Vulgar History in 2025. And 2026 is going to be a big year. And I'm happy to have you all here with me for it. So enjoy this episode. So I'm joined today by Alexandra Vasti, author of Regency romance novels and also a historian. And we're here to talk about where those two things intersect, which is basically sex ed for the Regency era.
Yes, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to talk about this. I love when I have the opportunities to kind of combine my academic side and also to talk about the books. When I get to be Professor Alexandra Vasti. So I'm very excited and delighted to be here. Although I will say I'm a literature PhD. I do a lot of literary history, but I'm not a historian. I really am a book reader, a scholar of books.
So a scholar of books, and you've done a lot of research, obviously, for your books. So a history enthusiast. That's how I describe myself as well. I guess I just want to clarify also for the listeners, because we're doing a series right now about the French Revolution. And I just want to clarify. So what you're going to be talking about is Regency, which is kind of the decade after when the French Revolution was, but things didn't change that much. What we're talking about, it's not it's not in our modern era. It's not the difference between the 1980s and the 1990s. It's things changed slowly, especially for lower class people.
Yeah, I always think that's sort of interesting, though, because I think sometimes we can kind of like flatten out history a little bit and be like, oh, yes, everything in the 1800s. But actually, like, there's quite vast differences between like 1804 and 1884. And I definitely see that a lot with historical romance, because people often say, oh, they sort of treat them all the same, or sort of imagine that they were all the same, or that what would have been on people's minds or happening in 1884 is the same thing as a Regency, which is definitely not true. So yeah, I mean, I think that we'll see a lot of the same books were very popular, in the period, but definitely there are definitely differences as well. And, from France and England and the US, all of those things, we definitely see differences there too.
Definitely. So first, can you explain, that you have this historical interest just from your own personal work, and then from your books also. So explain the concept of the library that is in your books.
Yeah. Okay, so my trilogy of novels is called the Belforest Library Trilogy, and it is centered around this sort of notion that I had of my main character. This is a fictional library, it's not real, of her starting this secret circulating library for the purpose of sex education for women. So the way that this came up is that this was not like my first idea for the series. I really am like, as a writer of novels, I really start with the characters and kind of what the characters' interests and problems and conflict and, how they're going to get through the book. So I had this idea of this female main character, my heroine, as kind of a fixer, right? Like she's sort of a busybody. She's like always in people's business, and she's sort of fixing things and handling things. And I wanted her to have a deep, dark secret, or else the book would be quite short, 40 pages long, and they get married at the end. So I started thinking about this character and thinking about her society and what she would see in the world around her that she wanted to fix, that she wanted to change. And I was also thinking about things that were happening in the world around me when I was writing this book, and I was thinking a lot about book banning. So this was 2021, where we really start to see this big resurgence of book banning in schools, which obviously things haven't really changed in any positive way in 2025. But I was thinking about information access, and specifically information access about sex and sexuality and about bodies and gender, and how that's used as a tool for control, right? Like if we can keep that information from people, we can control them better. And so obviously that's very alive in the 18th and 19th centuries as well. So I had this idea that she would start this library. It's like a well-known public library, but has this secret stock of sex ed books for women. And that was sort of her way of tackling the problem of sex education in the period. So then, because, I'm a literary historian, I was like, what I need to do is fill this library with like real books, right? Like what books would she actually have stocked her library with, in 1815? So that was kind of the genesis of the idea for the library. And I really had a good time stocking her library and filling it with all of these books that really existed in the period.
It's interesting because I have my nonfiction book is coming out next year, Rebel of the Regency, the scandalous saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's uncrowned queen. And one of the things that I dove into for my research for that as well was looking at contraception and what would this woman have known about sex. And this is because, well, her story involves this, but also because she's apparently having a lot of lovers. And I was like, well, if she's having a lot of lovers, then either she's having a lot of children or she was doing something to prevent having a lot of children. And what were those things? And let me just research this a little bit. But then also this is coming in, your books as well are in a post Bridgerton on Netflix world where there's kind of, even the first season of that, there's this kind of, the way that there's a lot of people learn about history, the average person, not you and me, but the average person who just kind of like watches Bridgerton sometimes, reads novels sometimes, are like, wow, that's what history was like, I guess. Okay. So just assuming that like, oh, this is true. Wow, women didn't know about sex until their wedding night. What a shocking way to live. I guess that's how history was. And it's like, well, was it? Like that makes for a dramatic, interesting fictional TV show. But like what the research you're finding, it's like these were books that people that existed. Like women didn't necessarily like. Tell me about your thoughts about those plot lines on Bridgerton.
Yeah. It does make for quite good TV. People ask me this all the time, right? Because Bridgerton, I mean, that's a big part of the Bridgerton TV show is sort of the sexual education or the sexual journeys of women. And in a way, like there's something that's, I think, meant to be quite liberating about it. And funny, right? It's often played for comedy too, like with the Featherington sisters, the like very quaint comical, like inserts himself where. I love that scene. It's very funny. But people are always asking me like, is that real? Is that real? And the first thing that I want to say about this is that like it absolutely could be, just like it could be real today, right? If you did a survey of, 2,000 20-year-old women, they would probably have a vast array of different amounts of knowledge about sex and sexuality and, what's available to them. Because that's life. It's not something that we tend to talk about super openly, right? Oftentimes it's what school did you go to and how good was the sex ed program in your school? And maybe you were homeschooled. So maybe your parents, never called it a vagina, never called it a penis, never used the word vulva. You've never heard the word clitoris before until all of a sudden you're like on Wattpad and you're like, oh my God, what's happening, right? Like there are lots of different ways to access information and everybody is different and everybody's life experiences are going to be different. And that's true today. And it's true in the 19th century, right? So could there have been women who were like absolutely astonished by their, whatever, like, consummatory experiences? Sure. But there's nothing to suggest that was the norm, right? And I think that because we do see that in these kind of popular television shows, it tends to get flattened or to be thought of like, oh, that's the norm. But if we look at texts from the period, like even one thing that I think is really helpful is to look at books that were published like as contemporary novels in the period and what did those characters know about sex and sexuality? And they knew a lot. They totally understood, like even unmarried women understood like the consequences of having sex, that would lead to a baby, that, that this was a thing that happened and how that all worked. It was definitely far more the norm to know what sex was and how sex worked and that sex led to a baby than to not know that.
Actually, that's such a funny point. I hadn't related that to like, what about people today? And I'll just tell you an anecdote that occurred to me. So I have a friend who, she's an OB/GYN, and, sometimes she will share just interesting things that happened to her in her practice. And there was a patient who I think was a teenager, a pregnant teenager. And they were talking about like her delivery plan and stuff. And then it became apparent by the girl's reactions to some of what they were saying that she thought that babies were born out the belly button, like a pregnant person who was like in a quite advanced stage of pregnancy. And they're talking about her birth plan. And she's just like, why are you talking about this? And it's just like, how do you think the baby is going to emerge from your body? And she thought the belly button expanded and the baby just comes out. Like,
right. Not the norm, but it's totally feasible. I mean, we did fertility treatments for our children, and it is sort of a well-known thing that in reproductive endocrinology, one of the things they ask you is like, but how are you having sex? Like you got pregnant, but like, let's confirm the right, because some people don't know and they go to the infertility doctor because they've been, thinking that they're having procreative sex and aren't. So yeah, it is. But again, just like today, that's feasible. It's possible. It's a thing that could happen, but it definitely wouldn't be the norm. Like
it's not everybody. Yeah.
Right. Or even common. Right. So Jane Austen, we see plenty of characters who are having, unmarried sex in Jane Austen. She doesn't necessarily say that on the page, but it's quite clear, right? Like Pride and Prejudice, the reason that this is sort of so dramatic when we have the elopement with Wickham is that they're living in sin together and they're not married. She even says, Elizabeth Bennet says like, oh, well, for such a purpose as this, she could see why her sister's charms would be sufficient. Like he doesn't want to marry her, but he does want to have sex with her. Right. We also see like in Jane Austen's letters to her sister, she talks about a cousin who was intimate with her husband prior to marriage. And she says they get married, and she says to her sister, she's glad she doesn't have a congratulatory letter to write, meaning she's glad that the cousin didn't get pregnant, right? Jane Austen, who is an unmarried woman, of genteel birth, her dad is a vicar, right? Like, she knows what sex is and how it works, and the whole process of it. That would have been the norm, and she's definitely expecting her readers to understand and to know what she's saying and what she's getting at when these characters are having sex in the books.
I think the Bridgerton thing, it's such a popular show. So like a lot of people watch that, and a lot of people who I've talked to are like, wow, isn't it so sad in the past there wasn't sex ed and women didn't know this? And it's part of this sort of trend that I see over and over again that I'm sure I'm guilty of as well, of people just sort of assuming that people in the past were unintelligent and uninformed, and we are so much better now. Like, where it's like, no, people are exactly the same. Like, it's not that people used to be so dumb and now we're so smart, but it's kind of like, it's the same thing, like on Downton Abbey or something, where they're all like, a telephone, what? And everyone's just like, oh no, like electricity. Like, it makes us feel good to see people in the past be like silly, but that doesn't mean that everyone in the past was less informed than us.
Absolutely. It definitely makes us feel better to think like, oh, we've progressed as a species. And then, like, we look at it and you're like, oh, perhaps not actually.
No.
And I do think there is a lot of like flattening of the historical past. So I always blame everything on the Victorians. They're like
We do too. We do too.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. So in the Victorian period, we do see a lot of pushback against talking about sex publicly, right? Like even if we look at novels from like the middle of the 18th century, people like talked about sex like fairly openly. You could talk about sex workers, you could talk about getting pregnant. And so then it's a Victorian period where we start to get like, oh, she's in an interesting condition, and we just see a big pushback against like how open and frank you could be about sex and sexuality. And I just think that Victorian ideal has kind of got this chokehold on people's understanding of the past, that like, oh, that's how, everyone was the whole past was all the Victorian period. And I don't understand why that is. And I think it's really harmful actually to think that the historical past was this like repressed puritanical, hyper Victorian, like we can't talk about anything. We can't be frank about sexuality. I think it was harmful in the Victorian period, and I think it's harmful today.
Yeah, and just talking about the differences between country to country as well. Like in the research that I was doing, it's kind of like, well, this is happening in England. And then what I've been looking at this season on the podcast, the French Revolution in France and stuff, it's like, a couple weeks ago, I had an episode where a guest was on. We were talking about this American guy. I don't know if you've heard of him, Gouverneur Morris. He was like one of the founding fathers, and he went to France. And he was like a kind of like ladies' man in America. And he went to France, and he was like, "Oh my God! Like this is like everything is up a notch." Like he went there, and the first thing they said was like, "How many lovers do you have?" And he's just like, like the sexual mores were different from country to country. Like, have you come across that, like France versus England, just in your own research?
Oh, absolutely. So many of the books that I have in the library, so they're real books in my fictional library, in my books, are French. We're French. And, it's sort of funny because I think part of it was like publishing laws and obscenity laws were different as well. So these things could get published in French more easily. But if you look at the translation dates, they are getting translated to English like within months. People are like, oh, who's going to like that? Those like dorky, prudish English people, they're not going to produce it. But we can translate it and we can sell, thousands of copies because they're going to want it. So a lot of the books, the sort of explicitly erotic books are definitely French in origin, and then get translated into English and sell for a long time in English as well.
Yeah, and just in terms of what I forget if I read this in your article or in something else that I was researching, but just in terms of like contraception and stuff, like it was like there's stores that you can like buy these things, and there's kind of like code words where you can buy them. But I think it was people would go to France to get them and bring them back to England and stuff like that. I think I read that.
Well, there's also so we're right. So condoms were in use They were specifically used in the period to prevent pregnancy. We don't have germ theory yet, so there's maybe sort of a sense that like, oh, if you use a condom, like that seems generally to help you. There wasn't like a really clear sense of like, oh, this can be used to prevent disease. Like it's really very much about preventing pregnancy. But
and it didn't prevent disease because they were made of like sheep intestines.
they could be made of things that allowed bacteria to go through anyway. Right. So anyway, but condoms were absolutely in use. And there's a lot of times when they're referenced, we see them being called like a French device. They were, I don't know the word off the top of my head, but they were called gloves. And they would use the French word for the glove. But, we see a lot of things, even in England and in French, where if it's like a little scandalous, they'll be like, oh, this belonged to this other tradition and we didn't invent this. It was the, libidinous French who created this device. But, French kissing, we call it French kissing. But but one of the very early references to it in French, they call it Florentine kissing. It was like, oh, it was the
a little bit different.
who invented this sexy sort of way of kissing. Right. So I do think that part of it, yes, is that attitudes were a little bit more open in France and other places in Europe. But also there was a sense that like, oh, we could just blame it on those, lewd Gallics and not have to take responsibility for it. But yes, I'm very interested in talking about contraception and how it was popularized and discussed in the period because I think that's super interesting.
I think it's also like, that's another thing that, well, part of it is the novel. There's so many books, like, in your book, there's this library of real books. Like so many books existed. And nowadays, when you see this section of like classics, it's kind of like Charles Dickens, Jane Austen. It's kind of like, these are the authors who like survived through till now, but it's like, but back then there was so many books and we just don't know about them. So it's kind of like Jane Austen was not the only person writing books in the Regency era, but they're kind of the only, her and like Mary Shelley, like a few other people, like those are the ones that are still kind of like studied and thought about, but there was so many books. And so it's also like that sort of flattening out to be like, well, that was the only novel anyone had to read. It's like, no, there's so many books that people are reading. And so stuff about contraception, I think like a really popular genre of book in this era and in the 18th century and in the early 19th century was like courtesans' memoirs. Like the memoirs of we did some episodes about this Irish brothel owner called Peg Plunkett, and like her diaries, like she lays it all out. Like she's just saying everything that happened. So people who were not courtesans or people who did not visit courtesans like to read these just to be like, to learn like the titillating stories, but also there'd be stuff in there about contraception, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. Everything you just said is like my deep, deep special interest. So I will try not to lecture for too long.
No, please go ahead.
So, all right. So when I'm sitting down, I'm gonna think about this library that I'm creating. I'm gonna use real books, and I'm thinking, what books would she use? And I write down, I'm sort of just like taking notes, and I'm like, well, she's going to use memoirs, right? She's going to use like all these, sexy memoirs that were very popular. Like she's going to use medical books, right? Like how is baby form? She's going to want like porn, right? She's going to want erotic illustrations or erotic novels. And then she's going to want just like romance novels, right? And it's so funny because I just sort of jotted that down off the top of my head. I was like, this is what she'll want to have. And then the more and more research I did, like that sort of just quick imagining that I had really hit the nail on the head in terms of how sexual education actually was accomplished. And the funny thing is, I think that my sort of instinctive, it wasn't just because like, oh, I know a lot about history or whatever. It's because that's how it works today, right? Like so many texts have served dual purposes, right? We read a romance novel, sure, it's titillating, but also you're like, I didn't know that could happen, right? The line between sex ed and something that's designed for titillation or this pornography there's no direct demarcation between those. All of those things can be contained within one work. And that was super common in the period as well, right? So we see, like, if we look at Pepys, Pepys, the Diary of Samuel Pepys. So he for any listener who doesn't know, I highly recommend. I was going to say P-E-P-Y-S. P-E-P-Y-S, right. I highly recommend reading this man kept like a detailed diary of his life for a couple of years. And it's like the most frank discussion of sexuality that you can imagine. And it's incredibly interesting to learn. But anyway, so he's like, and then I masturbated over this textbook, right? Because there is no strong demarcation between things that are intended pedagogically and things that are intended for titillation. Humans are weird, kinky freaks, and we can learn from our porn, and we can be aroused by our medical textbooks, and all of these things are combined. And in fact, one of the things that I think is super interesting is a lot of things that were explicitly designed for titillation, that were explicitly pornographic in the period, especially in the 18th century, are they pose as an educational text. So an incredibly common form of erotic novel, and a lot of these were French too, was framed as a conversation. So there are almost always two women. Lesbian erotica is incredibly common in the 18th century. So we have these two women, and one of them is like this, is older and is experienced and knows the ways of the world. And then we'll have another younger woman who's maybe embarking on her first relationship. Maybe it's her wedding night. And the older woman, and again, these are they're porn. They're meant to be pornographic. They're meant to be arousing. But the framing of it is this older woman is saying, let me tell you about how it's going to be. And often that involves the older women demonstrating. It's just like, let me show you what it's going to be like when you kiss your husband. Let me kiss you and see, oh, aren't you turned on? That's exactly what it's going to be like with your husband. It's an incredibly common form that we see in the erotic novels of the period, that they're framed as these conversations. A lot of them have school in the title, like School of Venus is a really popular one from the 18th century against, French. So I was just fascinated by discovering how blurry the lines are between these erotic texts and the explicitly pedagogical texts.
No, and something that I wanted to bring up also, like this is we're having this conversation, and it's like perfectly positioned where I am in the season of my podcast, because we've recently just had a discussion of the movie Dangerous Liaisons based on the book Dangerous Liaisons, which is also another movie. Like, we talked about this in the conversation of the movie, which is like very, 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 very similar to the book, which I read, and you have these extremely sheltered young women who were raised in convents, and then they have not been trained or been prepared for what it's like when like a womanizing sociopath, frankly, is like sets his eyes on you, and he's like, I'm going to teach you sex ed, and they're like, great. So it's sort of like, on the one hand, that shows like, a young woman could be taken advantage of this way, but also it shows that book was so popular. It's showing young women, here's the warning signs. Like, this is like a man who's going to use you. So it's kind of like the book is, and it's not a conversation like the ones you're talking about between two women, but like Dangerous Liaisons is written as letters. So it's people are talking frankly because they're writing a personal letter to somebody else. So you can get to kind of more innermost thoughts in a way.
Right. I mean, and that's very common in the sort of origin of the novel form. Like we really had to invent this concept of a novel where you could just be like, here, this person said this and this person said that. Like, that wasn't like a natural thing. Like, we really had to invent and work really hard to come up with what now is just like the typical structure of a third person novel, right? So that starts as the epistolary form. So when we first start seeing novels, that epistolary framing is almost ubiquitous, right? Because otherwise, why would you be writing down the story of what this guy did and what this guy said? You have to frame it as like, oh, I'm writing a letter to my friend. So the epistolary form is just inherent to to many, almost all early novels. But yeah, I think it's so interesting. And also, a lot of these books are absolutely written as kind of like a warning text. We see a lot of that kind of moral panic over like what could happen to women. But the line between warning and something that's designed to arouse or titillate is very thin also, right? I particularly, and I guess probably just because I'm a romance novelist, I tend to be like extra fond of the ones that aren't warnings, but that are just like, and this is great.
Yeah.
I'm going to teach you about this thing. School of Venus, she describes it as the many ways of fucking. She's like, I'm going to teach you about the many ways of fucking because it's going to make your life so much better, and you're going to have a really happy marriage because of that. But so one erotic novel that's like unbelievably famous that you can't talk about the period without talking about is Fanny Hill. So Fanny Hill is one of the few that's written in English that they didn't have to steal from the French. And it's written by John Cleland. And it was first published in 1748. And so Fanny Hill, it's framed as her kind of memoirs. So this idea of like framing something as memoirs, sometimes they were real, sometimes they were fake. So there was this sort of device that like, oh, I discovered this woman's letters in a drawer where she talks about her experiences, and now I'm so scandalized that I'm forced to publish this so you all can be scandalized too. And so anyway, so it's written as sort of these fictional memoirs of Fanny Hill, a woman of pleasure. So she's a sex worker in the 18th century, and she falls in love with one of her clients, and then they are separated through the disasters of life. She has this like sexy career, and then they get back together, and then they live happily ever after. It's quite charming, actually, the experiences. But Fanny Hill is also written as it's like, here's how she learned about sex. So that sexual awakening or that sexual discovery is very, very much present in that as well. So she goes to this house of pleasure intentionally, like she intends to become a sex worker. She's initiated into the ways of sex through the other female sex workers who quite hands-on teaching experience. So all of the first sex scenes in the book are between two women. And then she goes on to have her various exploits and fall in love and live happily ever after with her darling. And it was unbelievably popular. Peeps also had a great time with Fanny Hill as well. Cleland did go to jail for it briefly. It's sort of debated as to like why exactly they prosecuted Cleland, but he was fine. A lot of people went to jail. It was actually quite.
I feel like that would just make more people want to read the book.
Yes, yes, right, absolutely. There's another guy, Richard Carlisle, who wrote a book about contraception. He was a big proponent of free love in the period, and he was a really big proponent of like women's sexual pleasure. And so he it's actually like an incredibly comical book if you read it. He's like, look at all these women. He's like, who are just not getting fucked regularly. He's like, you can just tell by their pallid, they're lethargic. He's like, and you know what's going to help them? Getting railed every day. So the point of the book is that it's quite short. You can read it quickly. The point of the book is that contraception is going to like solve all of the problems of the world. He's very in favor of it. And so he goes through this long discussion of different types of contraception. Anyway, he was jailed also. And people, they eventually like released him because they were like, the more that we keep this guy in jail, the more that we're drawing attention to this. And he was a radical in many ways. He's actually a very interesting figure.
Tell me about contraception. Besides, like we talked about condoms, what are the other methods that women specifically would know about or might be using?
Yeah. So What is Love is a really good one because it's also called the Every Woman's Book. Every Woman. He was like, he's great. He wanted to sell some books also. So he goes through and talks about the different types of contraception. He was a big proponent of the sponge. He thought sponges were the way, and they were very popular in the period as a form of contraception.
So this is like, I'm going to presume, and you can correct me, some sort of sea sponge based on technology. And that would just be a thing that would like absorb the semen. Is that right?
Yeah,
you would like
absolutely.
put it up inside.
So you'd put it up there. The semen would form a physical barrier. People would soak them in things that they thought would be like a spermicide also. So you could soak your sponge in vinegar and then, insert it. Yeah. Also fun. You could go into a shop and there would be like a clock And each, hour was like a different form of contraception. And you would turn the hand of the clock to the one you wanted, and then the clerk would like pass it out to you.
Love
and it was
it.
sort of
Okay,
this,
okay.
you could kind of like pretend
Secret
that you had
code,
not really. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, so he really liked the sponge. He was a big proponent of the sponge. He thought that was good. He thought it was the most effective. He in the book, he's like, I don't know, but people say that you can't even feel it when he's like, not that I've ever partaken myself. But also he talks about condoms as well. He talks about withdrawal. As a way of preventing pregnancy. Again, there's really no sense of like diseases or germs or germ theory. So
yeah, because people didn't know anything. They're just like, here's some leeches, like everything's cool. Like,
I mean, we just don't know about germs yet, right? So that's not available to them. He also talks about, it's really funny in the book. He's like, so a lot of people believe that you can ejaculate away inside, but not up by the womb. He's like, but, he's like, you can decide for yourself. But he's like, but to me, the notion that you can really tell if you're by the womb or not, he's like, is not clear. He's like, so I'm just going to say that's not the one I would recommend. So apparently that was like an extant theory that you could ejaculate, but not like by the womb.
Just direct. Yeah. Okay.
Just
good luck with that.
Shoot it elsewhere. Yeah, no, I don't think it was. The other thing that's interesting that Carlisle talks about in the book is that he's like, we don't totally know how conception works, which is interesting too, right? Because there's obviously a lot of physical evidence, but the sex cells and different types of cellular meiosis and mitosis is not something that people are clear on in any way. So we've got thousands of years of physical evidence that like doing this thing results in babies, but not a really strong sense of how exactly it works. So we're really kind of feeling it out as you go for how contraception could be handled.
Well, and this makes me think about something else that we haven't yet talked, like my season of this podcast, we've been looking at all these revolutions and like we're leading up to a discussion of Marie Antoinette and her life. But like just to get into like some Marie Antoinette spoilers, like she and her husband did not have children for several years. And it was really stressful for her and for like the country of France, because it's just like, why are they not? Eventually they do conceive, like there's sort of like intervention, her brother. Like, so I think part of it was just like what method were they using, or what the physiology of her husband was, maybe like they had to use a different method. But it's just, if you have these two teenagers and they don't know what they're doing, like you were saying, people going to the fertility doctor, or some people going to my friend who's the doctor, sometimes like, yeah, we're having trouble conceiving. And she's like, are you having sex like this? And they're like, what?
Right.
Like the Featherington sisters, they're like, I would never have thought to have done that, So like there are people who just don't know.
Yeah. So there's a book called Aristotle's Masterpiece. And Aristotle's Masterpiece was first published in, I want to say 1648, 1600s. And it purports to be a medical textbook about conception, how to conceive, pregnancy, labor, things like that. And this book, Aristotle, people thought like Aristotle was sort of both like he was very knowledgeable, and this is classical. So it's, it makes it sort of gives it this ethos of accuracy, but also like there was this association of Aristotle with like sexy stuff. Like a lot of sexy stuff gets like the Aristotle stamp. So anyway, Aristotle's Masterpiece. When I was first researching this, I was doing, I was looking up academic articles about Aristotle's Masterpiece, and I kept finding them about James Joyce's Ulysses. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I was like, is this a different book? Like that book, was published in 1922. No, Aristotle's Masterpiece is like the biggest seller for 300 years. People were this book was like the book. So it's published anonymously, and obviously like copyright is not copyright in 1648. We don't really have that. So printers would be like, oh, this is a good book, I'm going to print it too, and like print their own version of it. So it gets, for literally 300 years, this book is like the preeminent book on procreation and conception. And it gets constantly edited and changed, and new things are added. I've seen some really interesting articles about Aristotle's Masterpiece. They're like, what do we learn about people's ideas of sex if we compare the 1648 version versus the 1748 version versus the 1848 version, because, things really change vastly. Some of the versions of it are very much focused on like learning and kind of, this is the most that we know. They're more scientific. And some of them are more kind of like a warning, right? They're like, oh, this is what can happen if things go wrong. There's a lot of sense of like, kind of the secrets of the woman's body, and like, how can we ever learn her secrets? So there's a lot of discussion of like the clitoris and how it works and how, is it important? Is it not important? Does it play a role in procreation? We don't know. Here's what we can observe. There's a ton of discussion of virginity. Even in 1648, it's very clear in the book that like the hymen doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? So they're like, the hymen, it may exist, it may not exist. They're like, maybe there's one part of it that's like the humors can eat it away. If you have bad humors, your hymen can just vanish. But there's also a big part of it that's like how to fake a hymen. So, right. So this idea of the hymen was quite, it could be serious business. It could be used in courts, in the court of law. If a woman was examined and found to have a hymen or not have a hymen, that could be used in court. So there's a lot of discussion of like, how do you fake it? If you're about to get married and you're very worried that your husband is going to think you're not a virgin, like, how can you create a fake hymen?
Can I say that is still a thing? My friend, the doctor, has had patients who are from like very conservative cultural groups who ask if like, could you sign it? Like they asked my friend, like, could you sign a certificate saying like my hymen is intact even when it's not? And she's just like, I don't do that. That's not a doctor's note that I will provide for you. But there's people who insert like blood-filled balloons, and like she's learned about all these things that people do because like in some cultures, like it's really mandatory that there's this like hymen breaking moment. So that's interesting that, yeah, people were doing that then, people are still doing that now. And now for a quick advertising break.
What if I told you that 2026 is the year you launch your business? Maybe you've got an idea you just can't shake, or that hobby that everyone in your life is telling you to sell. Taking that first step and finally taking action can feel impossible. But with Shopify, all you need to turn your dreams into your new future is at your fingertips. Make 2026 the year you transform into the entrepreneur, founder, and boss you were meant to be. And the one powerful move to make it all happen is starting your business with Shopify. Shopify gives you everything you need to sell online and in person, giving you all the tools to easily build your dream store. Choose from hundreds of beautiful templates that you can customize to match your brand. And you can set up quickly with Shopify's built-in AI tools that will help you write product descriptions and headlines, as well as edit product photos. Millions of entrepreneurs have already made this leap, from household names like Gymshark and Mattel to first-time business owners just getting started. Marketing is built in too. You can create email and social campaigns within Shopify to reach customers wherever they are. And as you grow, Shopify grows with you. The same dashboard that you start with will evolve as your business does to handle more orders and expand to new markets. In 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm. Hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side.
Your planet is now marked for death.
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four: First Steps is now streaming on Disney+.
We will protect you.
As a family.
Light him up, Johnny!
Marvel's first family is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes.
That is fantastic.
And critics say it's one of the best superhero movies of all time.
Oh!
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four: First Steps, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
What time is it, Ben? It's clobber time!
This episode is brought to you by Espolón Tequila. Slow, sticky, snoozy. They call these the dog days of summer. But Espolón? They don't do boring. Welcome to the Marg Days. Espolón Tequila. 100% blue Weber agave, born to shake up your summer. Just add lime, agave, and a little attitude. Visit espolontequila.com. Espolón Tequila, 40% alcohol, volume 80 proof. Copyright 2025 Campari America, New York, New York. Drink responsibly.
Gold Bond knows that every glow up starts with radiant skin. So choose Gold Bond Cocoa Butter Glow for a body lotion that's clinically shown to give you smooth, glowing skin. But don't just take our word for it. 88% of people who tried Gold Bond Cocoa Butter Glow saw glowing skin in just 1 day. Gold Bond Cocoa Butter Glow. Nourish your skin. Reveal your glow. Buy now on Amazon.
And we're back.
And right. And it's kind of bonkers too that in 1648 the people writing this book are like, and even if it doesn't exist, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And
they
now it's
then
2020, right? And yet still this myth persists somehow. Yeah. So anyway, so Aristotle's Masterpiece is a really great book for just seeing how understandings of sex and sexuality changed. But anyway, I think the reason I initially started talking about this is because I've seen a historian say that this was considered a really common and typical newlywed gift. I don't know if that's true, but I have seen like a historian argue that like you would, I mean, it sold so well for 300 years. Obviously people were buying it, and anyway, so a couple would get married and you'd be like, hey, here's your book. Here's your Aristotle's Masterpiece. It's going to teach you like, there's one part of it in the later editions that's like a manual for like how to have sex. It's like, first you take your clothes off, then you touch the woman here, and then you touch the woman there. And it's got like a nice little emphasis on like the orgasm too. And like for both parties, that's quite important. That was seen as like a big thing. Like everybody needed to climax to get pregnant. So anyway, so this book was very popular, very common. And it's actually very funny. I read something about Aristotle's Masterpiece that in the 1700s, all like young men would like pass it around for its like, instructive purposes or whatever reason, but that it was kind of like cringy and embarrassing. And they were like they called it a granny book. Like it was like it was sort of like, passing around like your grandmother's bodice ripper. But it was still instructive, right? Well, another thing that bothers me about kind of representations of how people learn about sex in the historical past is that it's always women who don't know, right? So like in various popular representations of sex in the past, it's like, oh, women don't know anything, but men are expected to know everything, right? Like they're expected to whatever, and that's one of the things I think is so charming about that Featherington scene in Bridgerton. The husband doesn't know either, right? Like neither of them know how it is supposed to work. And I think that that's also very harmful. This idea that young men who would have gotten married to the period are supposed to just like magically know everything about sex and how it works. That's not based in any reality either.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine like for people like yourself who are writing Regency romances, with that in mind, there's the old trope of just kind of like, oh, the virgin who doesn't know what she's doing and the man who like comes in and he introduces it. Like I would think like contemporary writers are having a more nuanced portrayal of relationships in this sort of book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was very shocked, I don't know. I was very astonished by this. The first book that I put out features a non-virgin female main character and a virgin male character. And I just wrote it. And my first book was self-published. My first couple books were self-published. And all these people were like, it's a gender swap. And I was like, what? Like that was so far from my mind. That just did not even occur to me because, it was just a historical reality. Sure, that would have happened for some people sometimes. And oh my God, I got so many like blistering emails that like I had made this female main character a slut and a whore and that she had, and I was like, what? I was not expecting like the vitriol that I received. Of course, then I was like, well, now I'm going to write it 10 times more. So my readers were then treated to many more of that exact pairing. So it's very interesting. These ideas just are very entrenched And we see them pop up everywhere. And it is, of course, that would have represented some people's experiences, but it certainly doesn't represent the totality of experiences.
Well, and I think in terms of the books written at the time, and you know a lot more about this than I do, but I'm just going to say something, tell me if I'm right or wrong. But the books written at the time, like French Revolution era, Regency era, versus books now written about that era, books written, people expect a certain, like you were saying, people thought it was a gender swap, but a certain sort of thing of this like naive young virgin, and then this kind of like worldly man who teaches her stuff. And it's kind of like, that's just what people imagine things were like then. So you want to read books that reiterate that, but it's like things weren't necessarily even like that then. But people get these really entrenched ideas of what history was like, and then they get mad when someone's like, well, actually, what if history wasn't like that? But I feel like Regency romance is such a long-standing genre that people are just like, that's what it was like. And if you're making it different than that, to challenge what people's understanding of the past is. And I mean, we're not going to talk about this because I've talked about this with other guests, but I mean, involving Black people, like having non-white characters, where it's like, what? That's not true. It's like, oh, actually it was true. And like, so many people's understanding of what the past is like is based on like movies they've seen or like a book they read that was written in the Victorian era or written in the 1950s, where it's like, well, that was true. It's like, was it? Like, just trying to buck against what history was like versus what people think history was like. And people like their idea of what they think history was like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that many people are actually like quite eager and excited to learn about things being different than what they assumed. It's just that we get these sort of like loud voices who are so angry about it that sometimes that's what our brains focus on, or these loud, angry, wrong. Nothing is more frustrating than someone being wrong on the internet, But yeah, I also think that if we look at hundreds of years of this sexual awakening story being popular, obviously there's something titillating about that, right? Like, obviously, people are kinking on this idea of this young, inexperienced person who has to be taught and sort of led into the ways of darkness and depravity, right? And we see that in 1748 with Fanny Hill, and we see that in the first season of Bridgerton when Simon is like sexily whispering into Daphne's ear about like how she needs to go home and touch herself, and she like has to discover the concept of masturbation because of Simon. Obviously, this is something that people are like finding kinky. That doesn't mean it's like the historical reality, though, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I want to say to people like, look, if that is your kink, that you want like a sexual awakening story, that's fine. But that you don't have to frame it as like, because that's how it was. Because that's when I want to push back a little bit.
Well, what I'd also love to get your take on is something that I've come across especially in the French Revolution era. Like it's such a weird time of like, there was so much social change and like exciting stuff happening, but there's also this huge, overwhelming conservative, like women shit, like Rousseau was being read by everybody and so it's just like, women should stay home, like they should be like having babies, like women shouldn't be entering the political discourse. And so you see things like hatred of Marie Antoinette and like the female revolutionaries, and they were all just like, she's a whore. And it's like, when I'm looking at these women's lives, like the revolutionaries, what I've looked at so far, it's like, actually she wasn't, and she could have been, and fine. But like, these are people who, like the slut shaming of just like, especially, I don't know, because Marie Antoinette was a married woman. So slut shaming of married women, of unmarried women, of just being like, these women are sexual entities and that's bad and that's wrong. And in most of the cases I've been looking at, let's murder them, which they did. But yeah, so how do you, like, you've got these sexy novels coming out of France specifically, but then you've also got this, like, it reminds me of now, like the trad wife conservatism, where it's like women shouldn't be doing stuff. They should just be at home. They should just be having babies. Like, how do you square that off to have this like licentious society, but then also this like weird conservative thing?
Right. Well, because it is exactly like today, which is that there are a lot of people that we're talking about, and there's a vast spectrum of political beliefs, and, certain things can be used to incite a moral panic, can be weaponized, and it is extra easy to weaponize claims against women. So Mary Wollstonecraft, right? I love Mary Wollstonecraft. My third book is dedicated to Mary Wollstonecraft. Very normal, not dorky thing to do at all. So Wollstonecraft writes about Rousseau in Vindication of the Rights of Women. And so one thing I think is really interesting about Wollstonecraft and about her life and her story is that she was pretty popular, actually. Like, people are always like, oh, she was, died in penury, which is sort of true. But a lot of people read her books, and a lot of people read Vindication of the Rights of Women, and a lot of people were very interested in what she espouses in Vindication. And a lot of people were talking about it and thinking about her in her period. And then she dies in childbirth, and her husband, William Godwin, thought she hung the moon. He thought she was the most wonderful, delightful, incredible creature. He was just totally, he was like a big proponent of like free love, and he was very anti-marriage. And he thought marriage was like the root of all society's evils. And he thought it was like playing a big role in bringing women down. He thought it was like a prison for women. And then he falls in love with Mary Wollstonecraft, and he's like, you know what? Never mind. I just want to marry you. I love you. It's very charming. Anyway, so she dies in childbirth. And he is so just like, he loves his wife so much that he's like, I'm going to tell everyone about her life because she overcame so much. She had a child out of wedlock. She had all these things happen to her, and she overcame, and she struggled, and she fought, and she wrote, and she was so brilliant. And he writes this story of her life and talks pretty frankly about her sexual exploits, which he thought was great. He thought it was just another sign of how like wonderful and radical and amazing and courageous she was. And he had absolutely no idea that people were going to take this and be like, we knew it. She wrote this book, and it was pushing the boundaries about women, and we knew she was a whore this whole time. And then they weaponized the fact that she had died in childbirth, and they were like, this was God's punishment on her for all the wrongs and evils and sexual evils that she did. And it destroyed her reputation for like 100 years. And I think that this is such a fascinating story because part of it is just a societal shift, especially in the Victorian period, toward more of that kind of domestic spheres, and women are the angel of the house. But a lot of it too is that it was okay for her to think radical things and to say and write radical things, but when she put a toe out of line sexually, that was the excuse that people could use to sort of slap her down and say, see, her ideas don't matter, and we shouldn't listen to her philosophies after all. And so I just think it's very, we see that today, right? That sex scandals don't really seem to affect men anymore, but even the idea of a sex scandal can be used to take down a female politician, for example, even if it's not true.
This reminds me of in the episode I did about Charlotte Corday, the like murderess of the French Revolution. At first they're like, well, she couldn't have done this. A woman would never assassinate someone herself. A man must have made her do it. And then she's like, no, honestly, it was just me. And they're like, okay, well, that must be because you're a whore. And then they're like, she's a whore. And then they did like a hymen inspection, and oh no, actually she died. And they're like, oh, she still has a hymen. They're like, oh, she didn't. They're like, oh wow, she wasn't a whore. She was unnatural. Why wasn't she having sex? It's like they kept pivoting. It's just like what she did was so threatening to like the status quo. So, but just the same thing to go from, it's like, oh, she's a whore. Oh wait, she's not a whore. She's a virgin, and that's bad. Like it's like we want to hate her. So let's just like pivot. It just seems the same thing with Mary Wollstonecraft. Like they're just looking for a reason to be able to hate her. And then her daughter, Mary Shelley, who absolutely like lived this kind of free love thing. Like I always find that really interesting because when I think about the Regency era, kind of the main, like Jane Austen is who people always fall to. And they think about her books, which are sort of like full of decorum and like etiquette and parties and balls. And it's like, yeah, but Mary Shelley was also writing at the same time, and she wrote Frankenstein, and she was like teenage runaway having babies with a man who was married to someone else, and her stepsister was there for some reason. Like that was the same time period, guys. Like,
well, it always like sort of puzzles me when people are like, oh, Jane Austen was like, writing these, like everyone's just in the ballroom. But like, people have read Pride and Prejudice. Like, they know that Lydia and Wickham run off together. What do they think that they're doing? They're having sex. It is like, it could not be more clear in the book that is what they are doing, right? So like, sure, she focuses her story on that, but it's not like those novels are absent of, it's just those aren't the main characters, right? They're the secondary characters. Anyway, yes, Mary Shelley is, so Mary Wollstonecraft dies in childbirth, and her daughter, William Godwin names the daughter Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. And yes, she, I always think this is very funny. This is something I always teach, that Godwin was like this big proponent of free love, and he didn't believe in marriage until his teenage daughter ran off with Percy Shelley, and he was so angry. And Percy Shelley was like, "What do you mean? I thought you were a proponent of free love." And Godwin was like, "Not when it comes to my daughter." It's quite charming. Anyway, yes, Mary Shelley. I don't know. Percy Shelley is not my favorite. He was a fuckboy, and
oh god, no, absolutely. Like Anyway, yeah, I did a whole episode about Mary Shelley, but I just think that it's interesting that she doesn't, in my experience, come up often when people are talking about the Regency era. She doesn't really come up, except like in her later life when she's like, a widow, and she's sort of like a more respectable, quote unquote, woman, and she's like preserving her husband's legacy by publishing his poems. It's like, yes, but it's like, no, but when she was 16, like, what was she doing, you guys? Like, she was traipsing around Europe, like with this like free love, like van life scenario. Like,
did you know that a lot of scholars think she was bisexual?
Tell me about that.
Well, we don't really know. We don't have a lot of evidence, but she does talk about her feelings toward other women, and that she's like, I don't really like men. She's like, but I do feel a little tuzzy muzzy about other women. And so tuzzy muzzy is slang for the vagina. So there is like a lot of scholarly focus on what did she mean when she says she has, feels tuzzy muzzy about other women. Like, seems quite like sexy to say, maybe. So we don't really know, but there's a lot of speculation.
Actually, that leads beautifully to something that I do want to talk about, which is your book coming out in September, which is a sapphic story. And what can you tell me about lesbians in this time period?
Yeah. I've sort of joked that like with every book that I publish, my author's note gets like longer and longer and like increasingly more defensive. I'm like, this is real. So Ladies in Hating is the third book in the library trilogy. And it is a sapphic romance. And so in the book, so it's, the premise is that the main characters are sort of dueling rival Gothic novelists who in research for one of their books end up trapped in this haunted house together that they're planning to use as a setting for their next book. Sort of while they're trapped, are forced to kind of confront, the sexiness underlying the hatred as you do in a romance novel. And so because they are novelists, I got to really indulge in myself in talking about the novels that they would have read that would have formed them as writers and that would have been available to them in thinking about their sexuality, right? So as I mentioned, Fanny Hill was really popular. It's definitely a book that they would have heard of, if not read, although, of course, I have them read it. And like I said, the first few sex scenes in that book are all between women. And it's really presented in 1748 as like, that's totally normal. So there's a character who... the first character that kind of instructs Fanny in the ways of sex is they're in bed together and they're, she's she's showing, Fanny how everything works, and she gets like very aroused and she like kind of has Fanny bring her to completion. And then there's a little discussion of this character's sexuality. And Fanny says it wasn't that she preferred women necessarily, although in my experiences, I did meet some women who did. It was just that she liked sex and she could be aroused by whoever she was with. And I'm like, oh, 1748. This is just presented as like one of various ways of existing in the world as a sexual being and having this outlook on sexuality. And different sexual, what we would today call sexual orientations, are presented in the book. They're not really considered shameful or shocking. There's like sort of one part is sort of played for comedy, which is that one of the women from their brothel likes to dress up as a man. That's like part of her gender presentation. And so then a man, thinking she is a man who prefers men, hits on her and they go off together. And then he's like quite upset actually to discover what's like underneath her clothing. But it's presented sort of like for comedic effect that he's just like, okay, well, I guess fine, sure, we'll go at it. But it's very funny that this, what we might consider like a traditional heteronormative pairing is like this disappointment, he's like, well, yeah. Fine, I guess. So I guess I'll do it this way. So it's just, we see this much less judgmental attitude than I think most 2025 readers would expect to see in a text written in 1748. We do see kind of increasingly more pushback against homosexuality as we get into the 19th century, and especially into the Victorian period, because the Victorians are the villains as always. But there's a lot of discussion of it. So one thing that's I think is always interesting to share is that in England, sex between women was never criminalized. That was not there. It was like, but what are they doing? Like they're not doing anything. They're not doing anything.
Right. It's that thing where it's just like, well, if there's not a penis, then there's not
one,
sex, I guess.
Right. Exactly. There's one court case that we have kind of a transcript of, and the guy is trying to sue his wife for adultery for sleeping with another woman. And the judge is like, I can't charge her for that. And the guy's like, well, she's constantly in bed with our neighbor and I can't get her out of bed. And the judge is like, but what are they doing in the bed? He's like, I just want to know more about what's happening. He can't conceive of what could be going on there. So sex between women was never criminalized, although sex between men was. And we see occasional, kind of that would be like a big news story that someone was tried for this and, whatever. And we see a lot of people talking about it in real life about should this be illegal? And we see a lot of people pushing back at the time, saying there's one really charming. It's the diaries of just this random farmer, and it's a really interesting historical document because a lot of times we only have access to kind of the upper class and kind of what their thoughts on things were. But so this diary is one of our few ways of accessing people from the working class. And so this farmer, I think I want to say it's 1810 maybe. He says something like, if God gave them this desire, then surely it can't be immoral. And it's just really lovely. And again, that is 1810, right? This is not some thing that happened yesterday. And I think people often are really not aware of the actual historical realities of the period, which is not this, homophobic thing, even that we see later in the Victorian period.
Well, I think also part of this whole discussion is that marriage at that time, French Revolution time, Regency era, is very much about alliances and real estate and bank accounts. It wasn't especially in the higher classes you get, it was never about love. And you had sex so you would have children so they could inherit the real estate and the money. So it's especially in France, so it's so you have lovers, but you have your husband and then that's who's the father of your children. So if a woman married to a man is having a sexual affair with another woman, it's well, she's not going to conceive a child. So kind of who cares?
Yes.
Right. That's not going to threaten the lineage. Yeah.
Right. It is very much non-threatening in that way. There's a kind of well-known political cartoon that I also reference in Ladies in Hating, where there's these two women kissing in the park. They're sort of entangled on a bench and they're kissing. And it's called Love a la Mode, with like meaning fashionable love. So obviously, like someone thought this was quite, the trend of the day was to sleep with your bestie. And then it says, or two good friends, which I think is so funny that people are like making that same joke, in the 19th century as they are today. Anyway, so in the cartoon, their husbands are behind them, and it actually uses their names, which was not always common. Like a lot of times the cartoons would kind of like try to just do an initial, but it actually uses their names. So we know exactly who these women are. And their husbands are like, what do we do? Because there's nothing that they can do. There's no way to kind of like disentangle them legally. They're just kind of like, well, hopefully they break up and come back to us. But again, this was like, you could buy it on the street. It was not, it was, so the existence and the idea of same-sex desire would have been something that people would have known about, talked about, would certainly have been available.
Well, and then you've got people like Anne Lister, right? Who, like, did she not marry a woman or something like that?
She did. Yeah, she did. Oh my God, I love Anne Lister so much. So Anne Lister, who is also a TV show, Gentleman Jack is the name of the TV show, if people want some more not quite so heteronormative representations of the past. So Anne Lister was like this very famous out lesbian. Like everyone knew that she was a lesbian. She would be like, hide your wives, because she was like so sexy and like so charming and like could just absolutely like get it. So one of her, after she finished sewing her wild oats, she fell in love. And she and her wife, whose name was also Anne, they got married in church in 1834. And then they went on a honeymoon together. And one of my favorite facts about Anne Lister is that she used to record her sexual exploits in her diary. So this is part of how we know, about everything about Anne. But she did it in code, and her like family sort of, it was like passed down, and they decoded it, and they were like, this can't be right, because it was so so sexy. And she loved, I don't know. I'm like afraid to say this on your podcast, but I will say it anyway. She loved to give head, and it was very much like a little competition for her of like, could she make her female partner come more often than she came? And her relatives were like, perhaps we have erred, but no, they had decoded it correctly.
That's funny. So it's like you're doing a crypto quote and you're like, oh, this can't be right. This can't, I must have decoded this wrong. This can't, because these are words, but this can be what it means. So let's just like tuck this away. Because isn't that what they did? Her descendants were like, let's just hide this back in the wall again for like a few more decades, because we're not ready to handle this. And then like a later generation actually, and thank God, like the diaries, like they're in an archive. I actually used a brief part of one of her diaries as a reference for my book, because she talked briefly about Caroline of Brunswick, because everybody was. That was my example of like, everyone was talking about her, even Anne Lister.
Even Anne Lister. Yeah. What does she say about Caroline?
Oh, she was just like, God damn it, everyone's talking about it, even me. It's sort of like people who are like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm watching Love Island.
Yeah,
I can't.
I was just going to say Love Island.
That was her vibe. She was just kind of like, I stayed up way too late tonight talking about Love Island. I hate myself. That was basically it. But Caroline of Brunswick is what she's talking about. And I was like, I have to include this in my book. But then there's also I was just going to say the ladies of Llangollen.
That's what I was going to say. No, that's so funny. Yeah, I was going to say, so Anne actually goes to visit the ladies of Llangollen, who were, again, very popular couple in the period. People were very interested in them. Queen Charlotte actually persuaded George to give them like a royal pension that they lived on, because they were such an interesting sort of celebrity couple. So basically, one of the women was sort of from this like upper class family. She was the daughter of an Irish earl. So the family was like, you need to get married. We need to whatever. And they revolted, these two women. They were kind of neighbors, and they kept eloping together, the two women. And the first time they got like sort of tracked down in like a farmer's hay field or something. But the second time that they eloped together, they were allowed to, I think their family just sort of like gave up and was like, all right, fine. And they had an aunt who supported them financially at first. And they lived together in Wales for 50 years. And people were super interested in them. And they were like, are they fucking? Like, I need to know. Everyone, like, they were constantly visited by, like, Wordsworth wrote a poem about them. Byron came and visited them. People were very, very compelled by the story. And so Anne Lister went and visited them and was trying to, like, hint at, like, are you a couple? And they wouldn't answer. And she, like, wrote to her friend later and she was like, I just don't believe that they're not a couple. But she was actually, supposedly she was very inspired by them, was part of the inspiration for her marrying Anne Walker.
So this is like, so your book, it's coming out, I think, September, Ladies in Hating, which is your sapphic story. But also I wanted to mention, like, first of all, that's the most important thing. Everybody should pre-order that book and get that book. But also the, like, getting back to Bridgerton again, there was hints in this last season that there's going to be a sapphic love story on Bridgerton. And some people freaked out. Well, some people were mad because, like, the original novel, like, that pairing was a heterosexual couple and now it's going to be sapphic. And people, well, it's the same thing. They're like, but well, there wasn't lesbians in Regency England, and everything you just explained, it's like there completely were.
There
like,
absolutely were.
Like, if we're looking at any era in, like, British history, it's like this is one of the time periods where we have the most confirmed sapphic relationships happening. So it's like, I think it's what we were talking about before, where people are just like, no, I want to believe that the past is this specific kink I have, and you can't. Like, don't kill that for me. But, like, so I love that your book is coming up because it's like, I'm sure that authors know you get into all of this as well, but it's just like another example of, like, no, this was like this was happening. This is not made up.
Yeah, that was a real reckoning for me as someone who has been reading historical romance for 25 years and is very engaged in the community. And I mean, I read those Bridgerton books when they came out. I was like 11 and I was devouring, like when they made that a TV show and it became like the phenomenon it has been, it was like the best day of my life. And, and this is a community that I'm very passionate about and a part of. And then, like, seeing this pushback against this, it broke my heart. I'm not gonna lie. It really made me devastated to see that. And I don't know how Julia Quinn does it because she is such a lovely person. And she'll post about it and there'll be like dozens of vitriolic comments about, like, how dare you go woke and, like, what? And she's still there. She is just still plugging away, posting on social media. It's very heroic of her and of the show to continue on in the face of this just absolutely A, mean, and B, wrong responses to this future sapphic storyline.
Well, and also just in terms of Bridgerton, which is like already, we don't turn to Bridgerton for historical accuracy. Like, when we're looking at the, like, for instance, like Queen Charlotte, what if she was, like, known and understood and accepted as a Black woman, where it's like her whole heritage, I did a whole episode about that, but it's like whatever her heritage was, she was not historically seen as a Black person. She did not move in the world as a Black person. That is not the story. But Bridgerton is like, but what if she was? So already it's like historically, like, inventive. So to be like, Bridgerton, how dare you have sapphic people? Where it's like, well, we don't turn to Bridgerton for accuracy. Actually, like, they're playing Billie Eilish songs at the ball. Like, this is not Are we turning to them for accuracy? Oh, we're not at all? Great.
Yes, so, I totally agree with you. Although I do feel that then that somehow bleeds into this idea that sapphic romance couldn't be historically accurate, which of course, as we've just shown, is not in any way the truth. So I'm wary of that particular line of discussion of the show.
Yeah. Well, I can't even imagine for someone who's, like, been in the Regency fiction world for so long, like, what the phenomenon of that has meant for how complicated this makes.
Yes, complicated. Exactly. Yeah.
Because on the one hand, you can be like, for people who don't know, for me, like, because I'm writing this book about the Regency, I'm like, people are like, oh, the Regency, like, people who don't know, I'm like, oh, well, Bridgerton. I was like, oh yeah, well, I know Bridgerton. Like, it's such an easy way to explain the time period. So I appreciate that.
Sure is. I also say that all the time. Yes, right. When I'm, like, talking to people about what I write, and I'm like, well, like Bridgerton, and they're like, oh yeah, Bridgerton.
Oh, yeah.
It's just become like a complete shorthand for, when you might have said Jane Austen, now you can say Bridgerton, and people people know. It's pretty incredible. For all the fandom stuff it has created. It's also been, I mean, I absolutely love the show, and I certainly think it is available to critique, and I have critiqued it myself, but I also love it.
Yeah, it's just so, and everything, we started off our conversation with Bridgerton, we're ending with Bridgerton, but kind of like that's the elephant in the room when you're talking about Regency anything these days.
Well, and especially, I think it's especially relevant to the things that we've been talking about, which are sex ed, and women and women's sexuality, and lesbian relationships. So really, it all comes back to Bridgerton, which I think is great.
Exactly. So remind everybody again. So your newest book is coming out, but you have other books that are already out. So just like let everybody know so they can get your books.
Yes, I have quite a few books out now. This trilogy that we've been talking about is the Belmore's Library trilogy. The first one is called Ne'er-Duke Well, and it came out last July. The second in the trilogy is called Earl Crush. It came out in January. And then the third one, which is the sapphic one that we've been talking about, is called Ladies in Hating, and it's
your
out
titles
in
are
September.
amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I love your titles. They're so
Thank you so much. This sort of the tradition of the pun title is still alive and well in historical romance. And that makes me very happy because nothing I like more than a little wordplay.
But yeah, so Ladies in Hating comes out in September. It can be pre-ordered. I'm just looking. You have a website, alexandravasti.com. All the links are there as well. And where can people follow you? Are you, I would not blame you if you're not online, but if you are, where are you?
If you like sort of goofy historical facts, queer literary history, things like that, I do make a lot of little silly videos on the internet, on Instagram or TikTok. You can follow me. I just did one recently about historical slang for breasts. Someone said had read titties in a historical romance and was like, would they have said titties? So I have a video recently about historical words for breasts.
That's very pertinent to listeners of this podcast because we often talk about titties out behavior.
So the answer is almost certainly yes, although they would not have probably spelled it titties. But yes, that would definitely have been available and legible.
I will just mention this has been a long discussion, but I do find it also interesting that the French Revolution, if you think about like Marie Antoinette and like how she dressed, like the huge dresses and stuff, and then the sudden pivot into the like Regency, the sort of like the draping, the Grecian sort of dresses, like, and some of those were so sexy, like completely see-through dresses. Like they were having like cotton muslin. People like wet themselves down so you could see their nipples. Like this was like, sexuality was like not hidden away in this time period.
Absolutely.
The dresses were just, I'm like, oh my, I didn't.
I have heard that the dampening the dresses is like wasn't real. Like it's kind of a historical myth. I don't know. Historical fashion is not my area of expertise in any way. Although I will say I have heard that it was like in political cartoons and kind of like satirizing like this new, like way too sexy, revealing fashion.
I think it might have been like a couple of famous courtesan type people maybe went to one party dressed like that once. And it's just like, everyone's doing it. This is what everyone's up to. But even the fact that they did that was like, okay, this is not the like Victorian era. This is something different. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for this conversation. I was so much looking forward to it. And this was so fun.
Thank you so much for having me. This is truly just a dream come true, actually. So thank you so much.
So just to say again, this episode was recorded a bit ago. Originally, Alexandra's book, Ladies in Hating, is now available. So go and get yourself a copy of this and all of her other books as well. You can learn about her books at alexandravasti.com and follow her on social media as well. And you can also follow me on social media as well. I'm at Vulgar History Pod. I'm basically everywhere you want to be. Like, because I've got my book, Rebel of the Regency, is coming out next month, or a month and a bit, February 2026. I'm going on all the social medias because I want to promote this book to everybody everywhere. So, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Facebook now, Threads, Blue Sky, we're on Substack, we're on everywhere you are on the internet, there's me. YouTube. Like, just follow Vulgar History to get all of our updates. But I mean, the place to make sure you get all the updates is to join my Patreon, which is at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And you can join there for free to get my updates. And if you pay a little bit, then you get a bit more. But whatever, you know all this stuff. You're a regular listener, and I appreciate you. And go to rebeloftheregency.com for information about my book, which is coming out in February, as I figure out information about my various book tour stuff. That's going to be all posted there as well. rebeloftheregency.com. That's where you can get all of your information. And yeah, Happy New Year to everybody. Can't wait for you to see what's coming up in 2026. And until next time, until next year, as a New Year's resolution, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Anne Foster. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Regency Era artwork by Karen Moynihan. Social media videos by Magdalena Denson. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans and at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com for everyone else. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod. Get in touch with me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
Curious about the future of energy and how batteries and storage are powering everything from our phones to smart cities? Join in on the conversation and tune into the Battery and Storage Podcast, hosted by me, Bill Durasmo, energy partner at Troutman Pepper Lock. Each episode explores the latest trends and features conversations with leading experts to answer your burning questions about batteries, renewables, and the future of the grid. Listen to the Battery and Storage Podcast on all major platforms.
If Bravo drama, pop culture chaos, and honest takes are your love language, you'll want All About TRH podcast in your feed. Hosted by Roxanne and Chantel, this show breaks down Real Housewives reality TV and the moments everyone's group chat is arguing about.
Roxanne's been spilling Bravo tea since 2010, and yes, we've interviewed Housewives royalty like Countess Luann and Teresa Giudice. Smart recaps, insider energy, and zero fluff. Listen to All About TRH podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. New episodes weekly.
If you love those, wait, what? moments, you'll love Something You Should Know. I'm Mike Carruthers, and on my podcast, we explore the fascinating ideas hiding in plain sight, like how elevators change the entire world, how gravity affects your health more than you think, or how to instantly become a better conversationalist. Each episode is fast, fun, and full of insight you'll want to share. So give it a try. Search for Something You Should Know wherever you get your podcasts.